Hey, Fox, thank you for coming in. I mean, you're just a remarkable contributor, just so many dimensional, work that you do across so many different spaces and just an amazing career as well. And so thank you for coming in and sharing your wisdom with my audience.
Thanks for having me.
So, Fox, what were the, two or three inflection points that made you who you are today? And it could have been when you're 2 or 3 years old or older, inside, outside the family, could have been inside, outside of school, could have been challenges you experienced or opportunities. What were those three magic moments in your life that made this wonderful person you are?
Yeah, well, I think the going back to when I was a kid, I grew up in foster care and and seeing just how many of my peers were really struggling and seeing just so much potential that was being lost and just good people that had good hearts, had so much potential, and yet were being completely sidelined simply because they were equally had something really bad happen to them and they ended up in foster care like myself. I think that was a really pivotal moment for me, and it's what has largely inspired the work that I do now on the investment side. The second thing that was probably most impactful was when I was in high school, right as I was dropping out of high school. My high school librarian, one of the final things she told to me when I was in high school was, she said, "Hey, everything that's happened to you," she said, "you have every excuse to be a victim and have every excuse to have a miserable life if you want to." She said, "But you also have the choice to use what's happened to you as what inspires you and it become your superpower." And it really resonated with me because I thought, like, wow, like so much had happened to me as a child. So much different types of abuse and just a lot of complexity in the family, that I thought, wow, like this is actually an opportunity where I get a choice. Like I get to choose. Is this become the thing that destroys me and destroys my life, or is this the thing that I get to choose that can help change the lives of others? And that's going back, that's what inspired a lot of my investment thesis as an investor and as a philanthropist, is how do we unleash that potential in people and in ideas, where that potential can easily change the world if someone believes in them and if those people believe in themselves and recognize that they have a choice.
So you talk about, these, one of the defining moments is the foster care, and it really shaped your view of opportunity and challenges and people who come from diverse backgrounds and how that background could shape their future and their attitude towards that
Yeah.
background and how you, I guess, there's kind of these psychological terms of external locus of control where you're a victim and or internal locus control where you take control of your future and leverage the challenges and the things that happen to create opportunities and things like that. So that's what I read from
Yes.
that initial part about the foster care, and then you meeting and having this interaction with a librarian who saw promise in you, and also provided some mentorship, and that mentorship is saying, again, you have internal control over how you want to shape this and how you can determine the future and things like that, and how you can use your learnings to then contribute, make a positive contribution to the ecosystem out there. And so those are pretty transformational and a great
Truly.
message for the audience, right? For you, because now you're mentoring a global audience. So
That's exactly it. And I think part of what really has enabled that for me is as we recognize that the scale that we're able to operate on because of the superpowers we're given, the adversity that we go through becomes that superpower. And what I think is really beautiful about when we think about adversity in that way is it allows us to have a really unique perspective for others, right? Like I have an ability to relate to people who have gone through, similar types of abuse and trauma as children. Other people have the ability to empathize and relate to other people who've gone through, those different types of struggles. And so I think that's really the beautiful thing about trauma is it allows us to be able to connect with other people in a very human way, in a way that it requires that level of empathy. It doesn't mean everybody has to have gone through the exact same thing, but when we can put ourselves in that position, it allows us to make better decisions. And I spend my day as primarily an investor, building companies either through capital investment or actually getting my roll up my sleeves and actually building the companies. And both of those require the ability to see opportunity where others don't. Because if everyone else saw the opportunity there, then there's no room for you. And so, but to be able to see that, you have to have a perspective that's unique, and that unique perspective comes from experiencing hard things.
Yeah, I mean, challenges is what really defines a person, and then what you do with those challenges to create opportunities, not just for yourself, but for others as well, where you share in the abundance, right? Because there can be abundance when you share with each other. Can you walk me through on a kind of a parallel side? You have all of these personal challenges, but you reframed it to do good for the world. How about your academic journey? What was that like in elementary school, then high school, and the things that interested you then?
Yeah, I was a horrible student. I I was a very curious student, and some of my teachers found that to be, I think, incredibly refreshing, as some of them have said. And others found that to be more frustrating. In fact, my Spanish teacher, she pulled me aside the last day of class and said, "I want you to know that you don't deserve to get the grade you got in my class, but I gave it to you because I'm the only Spanish teacher and I don't want to have you next year." Right? And so, like, I was very curious, and I really wanted to understand, like, what was the reason behind things? Why do things exist the way that they do? And even from the like math, I remember like simply being told the rules of math, and it's like, but why are these the rules? Like, what makes this the rule? And I always got in trouble because I would always solve problems in not the way that I was being taught to solve them, but I solved them in the intuitive way that made sense to me. I got the same right answer, right? But it was I wasn't using the process that the teacher wanted to see. And so in short, I was a very I got mostly very bad grades growing up, and in high school I dropped out at 15 just because I realized it was kind of pointless, and there was it was a long path ahead to maybe graduating. So I dropped out at 15 and then started college at 16, and then started my first company at 17, and then sold it at 19, and then started my second company, which was a defense company. And at that point, with my defense company, eventually dropped out of college and took a few of my professors with me to run that company, which was the world's first drone defense technology in the world. So it was the first system to stop a terrorist that was using a drone.
Okay, so now there's a lot there. So
Yeah,
let's unpack it. Let's kind
yeah,
of um, you're in high school or you're in school, but you ask a lot of questions. So that curiosity is really what drives discovery and innovation and companies and
yes,
things like that. And investments. A good investor, a good company founder is somebody that's curious,
yes.
asking questions. You've got to constantly ask questions. So those are really positive things, right?
Yes, but not rote memorization, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the thing I always struggled with is, and I tried, but it's like memorizing the dates that some war happened or somebody's name. I wanted to understand like why, why did this person do the thing?
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
teacher never had an answer, which I think frustrated them and came out in more aggression towards me.
But that's been your one of your superpowers, your ability to continually be curious and ask questions, right?
Yes,
And resilience, because your life has challenges and pushback, but you've been able to be resilient and agile and keep some optimism and smiling to
Yep.
this process, right? Okay, so you enter college, and so what did you study in college?
So I originally went in to study straight computer science. But I had a really bad computer science teacher who who was very just was not a fan of me for whatever reason. And so he threatened, he accused me of cheating and failed me. And so I said, "Oh boy, like, do I really want to retake that class?" And so I realized that I could test out of the class. I could retake it the next year and just simply test out, never have to actually show up for class. And then realized that I could keep doing that for other computer science classes. And so I did that, and my focus was around cybercrime. So it was a dual major of computer science and sociology with focus on criminology, with the intention of understanding like why, like the human aspect behind cybercrime, because at the time there wasn't really any research or discussion around that, right? It's like it was seen as like there's physical crime of like people attacking other people, and then there's this cybercrime which is all digital. And I thought, well, like we need to understand that humans are deeply connected to this. And so what's driving that behavior? Who is doing it? What are the human dynamics of that? And then ultimately, how do we help stop it without this cat and mouse game of cybercrime, which is, who develops the better hack? Is it the nation state that's trying to stop the other nation state, or the group, the wild band of rogue hackers? And that's what part of what led me into my the second company there, which was the defense company, is that I realized that cybercrime, you could actually take a step further into a completely unexplored area at the time, which was cyber physical security. So, right, there's the physical security world, which is like, we've done it for thousands of years, which is stopping people from coming at you. So, building really tall walls and fences and cameras and all of these things that we've continued to enhance the physical security world. And then there's the digital security world, which is protecting the ones and zeros, the data. But there is this, what I predicted would be an emerging space, which is the whole entire world of cyber physical security, which is how the digital world interacts with the physical world. And as we fast forward to today, it's pretty amazing to see Jensen at the CEO of NVIDIA, his announcement and talk about physical AI, right? Because I think the world is finally catching up to this realization that we don't live in a purely physical world, and we don't need to simply protect our data when it comes to cybersecurity. We are protecting human lives in a very physical way as more and more of our lives become digitalized, right? As we have robots going and cleaning, vacuuming up, right? To as simple as that you could buy for $40 that vacuums up your house, to drones that are flying in the airspace, to robots walking around the house, right? Like we really need to be thinking about the fact that this is not some futuristic sci-fi, but there's a very real threat here that also, if solved properly, is a very real opportunity to create an abundance of safety in our lives. This is what I was working on over a decade ago and built companies to solve. And now the world is finally catching up. Obviously, in the drone space, I started my drone defense company. Everybody thought it was ridiculous. They're like, drones? I mean, what are they going to do? Like drones, the big giant military things? Like we just shoot them down. Like people, the military told me, they're like planes. They just don't have people in them. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Because we don't have people in them, year over year, they're going to become exponentially more capable and exponentially more accessible. It's not just going to be nation states that have hundreds of millions of dollars per aircraft, but it's going to be consumers. And therefore, people that have malicious intentions or just recklessly are going to fly them. And I predicted that, and it's wild today to see on the front page of pretty much every news site the discussion of how drones have completely changed warfare. I'm still very much at the front of that through the United Nations, and the work we do in Ukraine. But it feels like a fever dream in a way to finally have, the world wake up in unfortunately very devastating ways, because there wasn't enough appreciation that we don't live in the world we live in today. We're actively building the future. And as we build that future, we need to put the proper safeguards in place to ensure that it's a future we want to live in.
there's so many different aspects of that that could be, again, we can dive in a little bit deeper. I just want to go back again, though.
Yeah.
You're you have an interest in computer science and cybersecurity and things like that. What
And
were you?
sociology. Don't forget, we got to shout out
Yeah,
the liberal
this,
arts.
yeah, exactly. Because you wanted to see the human aspect, right? Because cybersecurity always has a human aspect to it, and then later you talk about physical and digital and the convergence, and you're an early pioneer in the recognition of drone technologies and the threats. And then you even intersected that with the recent GTC keynote with Jensen, where he talks about all of these things are really important in this convergence. But yet you've been looking at this for over a decade, right?
Not
What
just
I'm
looking
curious,
at actively building and solving and deploying thousands of systems around the world. Yes.
yeah, but you're doing this. I mean, you built your first company when you were a teenager, right? And so were you coding? You were coding then.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Completely self-taught.
So what drove that curiosity into coding? It just
It was this realization I had when I was younger, and I remember being in a group home with a lot of kids that had a wide range of just different traumas that happened to them, and they were acting out in different ways. And there was a particular incident where with a girl that was pretty devastating, and I realized it kind of like it felt like a whisper in my ear was, if not you, then who? And like, who's going to do this if not you? Who's going to help? And that's been something that's guided me ever since. And I feel like I've had that whisper in my ear many times over my life. And this is what led me to that realization, is that like nobody else is going to do it. And so if no one else is going to do it, I got to figure out how to do it, which means I got to figure out how to code. I got to figure out how to build hardware. I got to figure out how to, not burn my, my tiny, little possessions I do have. Having them explode with a very fragile, very cheap lipo battery. You learn the things fast and the hard way sometimes.
and so that led you to teach yourself programming and coding and this kind of self-actualization. And this is so really you're really the poster person for self-actualization. Pulling yourself by the bootstraps and just bootstrapping everything. And then you created a company when you were a teenager. Describe a little bit about that company so they get a sense of that first accomplishment.
For sure. Well, and I'll highlight that certainly while it took an incredible amount of sheer dumb will on my part to press forward and perseverance, and a foolish dedication to a goal that actually turned out to work. Is the pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, as you said, and at the same time, I was very, very fortunate to have the right people intersect into my life at the right time, give me the right little piece of advice or the right encouragement or the right idea, to work through these things. I think the formula of success is so clear, right? You need the resilience, you need that ability to get through, plus the opportunity, right? You need to be in the right place with the right time with the right people, so that all of that collides. And this is one, and that's what equals success, right? It's resilience plus opportunity equals success. And some people have a lot more opportunity and a lot less resilience, and they that can equate to success as well. And some people have a lot of resilience but no opportunity, unfortunately, without at least a little bit of opportunity, you often don't see that success. But to answer your question about the first company, so it was a company I started when I was 17. It was a high performance drone manufacturing company. So it was I was making drones that could fly 100 miles fully autonomously, and created a pseudo LiDAR sensor that allowed for really lightweight, low computational and battery power. So it's known as SWAP-C, SWAPC. So size, weight, and power and cost sensor on the drone. to be able to significantly reduce the cost of drone technology so that my vision at that time was that you could have commercial and humanitarian aid and research uses for the drones, which ultimately worked out really well. So well that somebody bought it for the primarily for the intellectual property, not the. I did not have an impressive manufacturing capability. It was me and a few friends piecing the drones together that I invented.
And yet you have an exit, you're a teenager, and
Yeah.
then you then start another company and you hired your professors, and this is the defense company,
Yeah.
and it's just quite remarkable. What was it like hiring the professors? I mean, you know what I mean? If your
Yeah.
teachers are, you end up hiring them, right?
Yeah, it's kind of surreal to think back on. I'm like, boy, I was bold. Like, but they're amazing. Like these are people who've spent their lives, doing the research, and I think they were just really eager to jump in. And it's kind of funny because for one of them, I was still in his class, and so it was it's kind of a funny thing because we would be staying up late coding and working on a project together, and then the next day at a test like in his class, and we were both exhausted because we pretty much pulled an all-nighter getting ready to demo the technology to a police department. And it was just these funny things are like there's another teacher where I had to we were in San Luis Obispo, and we had a this really large, it's SWAT teams, so they have like a Super Bowl for themselves every year, and so they all compete against each other, and so it's and they were using our technology there. And so we had to go up to the Bay Area. And it's funny because I had to submit a formal request to miss class, even though I was going with him so it's just, all these like funny dynamics. But I've never, I think because I grew up in a very like complex relational environments with just, not like a stable family. Um, Relationships are all ambiguous, and it's all about what actually helps us accomplish our shared goals, rather than trying to stick to the script because I didn't grow up with a script.
Again, you're just always breaking your ground, right? And
Accidentally. Too dumb to know I shouldn't, and it keeps working out, so I keep doing it.
yeah, but it speaks to this kind of Angela Duckworth's idea of grit, right? Where you
Yes.
have some capability, but and with your case, lots of capability, and hard work brings skill and hard work builds achievement, and achievement, optimism, resilience, hard work builds ultimate success. Now, talk about some of the milestones in the second company.
For sure. Well, I'll tell you the first milestone was a friend of a friend's dad got me a meeting with the Secret Service. And being just barely not a teenager at the time, I think I was around like 20, maybe still 19, but around 19, 20, had this meeting with them. And I thought I'd like was bringing them, like, I thought they were going to clap and everything. I'm like, hey, just so you know, drones are going to be a problem. Like, we need to get ahead of it. We have an opportunity here because they haven't been a problem yet. We have a solution to the problem. And they're like, this is a problem that doesn't exist yet. So, and I'm like, yes, but it will. And they said, they said, kid, like, we have the most advanced airspace detection system in the world. They said, figuratively, but they didn't mean it, but they said that every single bird that thinks about flying near the White House, we know about. Right. Obviously, that's not the case, but they were making a point and, proceeded to essentially laugh me out of the room. And I thought, this, like, they do not get it, but that's okay. And again, dumb me, instead of being discouraged by it, I just saw it as like even more of an opportunity. Like even the experts don't understand what's happening. And I was just so confident that this was going to be the case. Again, that drones were going to exponentially increase uh, in this capability and accessibility, and therefore lead to this asymmetric warfare that would be nearly impossible to stop unless we got ahead of it. And so what's funny is 3 years later they called me up and they said, "Hey, we have a drone. It's on the White House lawn. We have no idea how it got here, no idea who, like, what it's doing here." And that was the start of a long relationship and a lot of things. But like those key milestones, and that was the first proof point of it. Now, it turned out to be a drunk government worker that crashed his drone on the White House lawn, but they had no idea. And then you fast forward, again, about 5 years after that, you think they would have figured it out. And you have a postal worker literally going postal and flying his small aircraft and landing on the congressional lawn.
Right.
Like, absolutely insane. Now, in that case, they did detect it, but due to ambiguity around who's actually supposed to stop it, he got all the way there, right? And so, another key milestone that I'll share on that side is when we finally did get the FBI to be excited by it, they gave me the bad news. They said, "Hey, we talked to the Attorney General's office, and they said we can't use any counter drone technology. We can't stop a drone." And I was like, "What if it has a bomb on it and it's flying towards the crowd?" They said, "Absolutely, we were told we can't stop it because legally, not just technologically, but legally." Because I said, "How's this possible?" And it's because drones were considered aircraft, and the law makes no distinction between an aircraft, a Boeing 737 or a drone with nobody on side. And it's a mandatory criminal offense. There's no exception for law enforcement to take down an aircraft. It's mandatory life in prison. And so I thought this is absolutely insane. And again, being young and dumb, I said, "Well, that's a dumb law. Let's change it." Again, they got laughed at and they said, "Good luck, call me afterwards." And so I went on the Hill and worked with Congress and, shared with them how unbelievable this was. And unfortunately, they said, "No chance, no potatoes." But I helped them to see that our nuclear arsenal was completely unable to protect itself. And so we got the first law passed that allowed anybody in the United States, any government agency, to stop a drone, which was Department of Defense, Department of Energy, as it related to our nuclear arsenal. That was the first step. Then went back and had to go through the whole process again on the Hill. Again, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know anything that I'm doing. I just have a lot of conviction and, again, too dumb to know that I shouldn't try, and went back and got the third law passed, which then enabled most three-letter agencies like Department of Defense more broadly, including the Coast Guard, DHS, and others, and worked with amazing people. It wasn't sheerly just me, but worked with a lot of people who had a similar passion for ensuring our laws are done proper. As one of the government officials said that I was working with, I won't say who he was, a very high-ranking government official. He said, "Fox, you don't understand. Like, what you're doing is crazy." He said, "Laws are written in blood." He said, "You're trying to preempt something." He said, "That's not how it works." And I said, I want to make sure that blood doesn't spill.
That's right.
And we were very fortunate to be able to do that and get those two federal laws written and passed.
Yeah, and really the world has proven your thesis in your execution in a demonstrable way. Again, now what are some of the additional milestones that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say from a milestone perspective, one of the things that I really was intentional about with that particular company was creating a place where unique people with high potential can thrive. And so I saw a lot of these programs. So for background context, as I was growing up with my biological family, pretty much all my siblings were severely disabled, and I was primary caretaker. And so like my sister, she was deaf, blind, mute, quadriplegic, very severe disabilities. And so I was very comfortable with people who, experienced the world very differently. And I saw this massive untapped potential in people who had, what some might call a disability. But I think that when people have a disability, they also have similarly a unique ability, right? And that varies by person. But I think that that level of resilience, and also going back to our biggest struggles are our biggest superpowers if we let them be. And so I created a framework to be able to hire people who were autistic, who had other behavioral educational, again, traditionally called disabilities. And I think what I accidentally did that I didn't realize at the time is that a lot of other, or not a lot, but some other major companies built out these programs as well. But the problem is that they tried to force those people, that population, into a traditional work environment, and ultimately, had those people doing mostly remedial tasks. And what I realized is like that's completely missing the point, right? Like and as I've told everybody that I've ever done anything good for, I said, I'm not doing this because I feel bad for you. I'm doing this because I believe in you. I'm doing this because you have a potential here that can change your life and the people around you and potentially the world. And so with that same ethos, we built out the program where, one of my first hires, not my first, but one of my very first hires was an occupational therapist, right? And as well as an ethicist. And I don't think that there's many startups that have, of the handful of employees have somebody who's, significantly, on the spectrum, an occupational therapist, an ethicist, and a homeless person, who at that time was, when I first started the company, was the first delegation I ever did was, hey, to my homeless friend, hey, like, can you dumpster dive for me? Because I got to run a company, I got to run. And so that's how I fed myself in the when I was just getting the company off the ground, because I was pouring everything I had into the company, and not paying myself anything. So they had to get creative.
So, I mean, just creativity in every sense of the word, from, programming novel, creating novel drone technology, novel legislation, novel hiring practices, you name it. Can you actually walk through then from sort of your first company, name the company, and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
just a quick descriptive statement of its
Yep.
sort of its focal area, the second company, and you've got a series of companies.
For sure. Yeah. So Drones for Change was the first company. It was the drone manufacturing company. I had technically a company before that, which was a computer forensics company. That is what funded my ability to start to pay for all of the supplies for my first kind of real company, which was Drones for Change. That I started at 17, and then at 19 started White Fox Defense Technologies, which is the first counter drone technology in the world. Um, Specifically for commercial and consumer drones. And then from there, start some biotech companies, started investing more. The big kind of had some really nice breaks after that in both my investments. Had some nice returns from those, and then probably what we're most well known for is Next Life Sciences, which is the world's first reproductive and sexual health platform company. And so it's pretty amazing when you think about in the healthcare space, uh, like we invest billions of dollars into healthcare startups and companies, and the reality is the vast majority of all that capital goes towards a very few number of indications, which are the biggest moneymakers, right? Cancer, heart disease, obesity, and weight loss. These are all big problems that need to be solved, right? And at the same time, there's a lot of other things that plague humanity. And one of the most fascinating things is this: everybody on Earth, every single person is either trying to have sex or not have sex, trying to have a baby or not have a baby, right? Fundamental sexual and reproductive health. And I think that every single person on Earth deserves the right to choose when and if to have sex and when and if to have a baby. Pretty wild, right? And so that's why we started Next Life Sciences, is because there was no other company that we could invest in that was actually solving this at its core. And the very first problem we tackled is the fact that half of all pregnancies are unplanned in the United States, right? Even more so in other countries in the world. It's the single biggest driver of social economic disparity, Right? And I saw it firsthand growing up in foster care in a very extreme situation where you're literally having kids, and those kids are ending up in foster care, and those kids are then going to end up in foster care, right? And we just continue to perpetuate the cycles of society rather than giving people an actual pathway out, which that pathway out is enabling them to be able to make a choice when they have a child, especially their first child. We know economically that the age and the socioeconomic position of a woman when she has her first child, she's statistically most often locked in there, plateaus at that level, right? And if she is with a male partner or any partner, I should say, as a couple, they are locked in there. And that's largely, it's just logic, right? They're making sacrifices because now they have to support this child. They can't go and move easily to another state to be able to get a better job or to, take these risks that they might have otherwise. And so, half all pregnancies being unplanned, like these are the things that future generations are going to look back on and laugh at us. They're going to say, Steven, like, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean in 2026? Like, it was just a coin flip odd that you're going to have a child or not that was planned. And also, if you're trying to have a child, it's also a coin flip odd that you're going to actually be able to have that child when you want to have a child. It's insane. Right. And so we started, the first product is the world's first male birth control. It's a non-hormonal option for couples and for men to be able to make that choice. I want a child right now, or I don't want to have a child right now. It's a light switch, essentially, right? You flip on your fertility, you flip it off when you don't want it, and you just leave it off 10 years. I don't want it, right? Oh wait, now actually a couple years later, I do want it. Now I'm going to flip it on, have my kid, flip it off. Like, women should not have to bear the burden of birth control. The consequences of hormonal birth control for many women are severe, right? And yet we've just said, suck it up. Sucks to be a woman. That's insane, right? Instead, and then the dialogue has been, well, birth control sucks, so let's just shift the burden on the men, get revenge. Insane, right? That shouldn't be. If we should just say, what if we took a step back and we truly innovated, right? I have my little birth control museum right behind me. What if we actually challenged the status quo and thought as a first principle, what is it we're trying to solve? We're trying to enable people to choose when and if to have a child, not how to flood their bodies with hormones in a way that minimally causes minimal amount of side effects and hopefully some level of efficacy that can depend on. So that's where non-hormonal male birth control and widely birth control options for everyone is so critical.
That's fascinating. So again, you're creating novel, broad application technology, solving a real problem, right? Yep. And it's universal, right? With Next Life Sciences, and then of course all of your proof points and your drone technologies. And before that, you had this computer forensics, which funded your first drone company. You indicated that you've had some great investments. Is that through a formal fund or just through your own personal kind of direct investment?
Yeah, personally. Yeah. So I don't go too much into those, but we've had some really great successes, and it's all based off the same principle, which is seeing potential in areas where others don't, and then asking, how do we unleash that potential? How do we enable people and ideas to be able to effectuate the change that we want to see in the world? My investment thesis is quite simple, and yet oddly novel, which is, what are the things that future generations will take for granted because we did it, right? What are the things that they can't imagine a world without? And I think when you really allow yourself to not have for all of us to have the ego to say, we're advanced, look at us, we're in 2026, we got all this cool technology. And you know what? Actually, we can make this technology a little better by iterating, right? It's not about iterating. It's about fundamentally revolutionizing. And I think this is the problem that Silicon Valley, one of my many, don't get me started. My wife will tell you I have a few things that you don't want to get me started on. Now I'm started on it, but some of the problems of Silicon Valley. So I'm here. Is that there's this whole idea of disruption, right? And the problem is when you put the emphasis on disruption, it makes the explosion what's exciting. That's not what's exciting. It's the revolution, right? And if that takes a disruption, so be it. But sometimes it doesn't take a disruption because sometimes you're creating an entire new industry. There's nothing to disrupt, right?
Right.
This is where I think like we people get obsessed with the wrong problem and they're solving the wrong problem. And I think it's one of the amazing things, if you've ever read Measure What Matters, right? It's like you got to actually be able to pinpoint this is actually what matters. This is what I'm measuring my success by. Because if you measure it by, oh, I'm disrupting this massive, industry with this giant TAM, then you end up with these iterative solutions that don't really matter. It might make you a lot of money, it might not, but it doesn't really matter for the future of our world. Our grandkids aren't going to care about it unless maybe that you're the grandkids of the founder.
Okay, so Fox, name or maybe it's a challenge that I'm going to ask you, but name three areas that we're going to be taking for granted, 5 years from now that don't exist today.
Yeah, great question. One is male birth control. Kids will
Okay, well,
be dumped
yeah, but
out.
you're
Yes,
doing that,
I'm
right?
doing that. Yes, I believe nuclear fusion
Right.
will also be an area where the future generations might not be 5 years, will be closer maybe 7 to 10 years, but they're just gonna like the kids that are coming of age in that time. They're just gonna be shocked that like, what do you mean you had like electricity bills and you were limited by all these things. And then the third is that right now there's 100 million orphans in the world, right? 100 million of kids that are in orphanages, foster care, that are in unaccompanied homeless, unaccompanied refugees, and unaccompanied sex trafficked and labor trafficked children, right? This massive amount. And what future generations will take for granted is the fact that right now, those kids have no pathway to real success, right? If they want to be a lawyer, a doctor, an investor, an inventor, an entrepreneur, whatever it is that they want to become, there's no pathway for them. And so, and this is the problem that we saw as we were donating to all these different charities. They would tell us the exact same thing. I have this one little boy, this one little girl who just has so much potential, but we don't know what to do with her, right? We don't know how to help him. And so that's why we started the Oasis Academy. It's the first school for gifted orphans, homeless, and foster youth. It's a full-time boarding school and we partner with thousands of these nonprofits around the world to give those kids a pathway out, to give them hope, to show that they can unleash their potential. And I hope that a lot of people replicate us, right? Like what Oasis Academy is, it's a pioneer and it's the first, but I hope it's not the last. And so I think future generations, my third point to your question is that they'll take for granted that if the kid has potential and they're willing to put in the hard work, that they can achieve anything. That democratization of opportunity does not exist today, right? If you're a kid and you're growing up in middle class America and you are really good at math, right? You have a little girl who's really good at math. Her mom is probably like, hey, you should talk to our neighbor. She's the CFO of a company. Or, hey, our other, my friend's husband is a CPA. Maybe you should like shadow him for a day. If you're growing up in foster care, you don't even know what a CPA or a CFO is. What does that even mean, right? It doesn't matter if you're the next Albert Einstein, right? Those opportunities don't exist now in a way that frankly they existed more so in the past, right? There was this more democratization and access to opportunities even in systems that were much more based on class, right? Because there was this appreciation of the potential in people, right? There were obviously a lot of travesties that have happened in the world, and incredible loss of potential. But I truly believe future generations will know that if a kid has the potential and they're willing to put in the work, there is absolutely nothing they can't achieve.
It's interesting, because you already have enacted this of bringing diverse, underserved populations into the workforce, and you talked about that, right? Including homeless and people who have different kinds of challenges and atypical people. People could be on this autism spectrum and things like that, and but not.
Atypical is a great way to put it because why would you want to hire somebody that's typical, right? Right? It's like it's people who see problems and see the world differently and therefore can create solutions that no one else can.
Yeah, and in fact, adding value,
Yes.
right? So they're actually increasing the competitiveness of the company or the
Really?
organization. Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly goes back to the point. It's not charity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I'm doing it and not taking the simple path for a reason, but I'm doing it because it's truly the right thing to do, right? It's the best thing to do. It's the thing that all companies should do It's not just the ones with, with large budgets who can afford DEI programs and, and sort of just see it as that. It's like, no, this is because it's the right thing to do that creates the right solutions and allows us all to live better lives.
Yeah, and then you know what you're doing with Oasis, where you're actually concrete creating this environment, beginning in Hawaii, right, with transitions with other campuses on the mainland and things like
Yep.
that. So with a very large endowment, and so that becomes just a regular part of society, right, and our being, right. So we don't have that many minutes left, maybe a couple of minutes. I'm doing 6 interviews back to back.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so on a technology side, and you mentioned fusion, can you maybe name two others that don't exist, maybe are 10x in the sense of we can't even imagine that we're going to have that as a concrete
100%.
place?
Oh, nope. Don't get me started. Okay. I will tell you, everybody loves LLMs, right? Large language models, AI that's based off LLMs. I think it's the dumbest fad in the world. And I think that some really smart people, drank their own Kool-Aid. Like LLMs are going to be the VCR of the future. We look back on a VCR and we're like, yeah, it was cool, right? And if you really think about the VCR, you realize that it was actually revolutionary at the time,
Yeah.
right? The reality is that if you wanted to watch a movie, you had to either go to a movie theater or catch it on the TV, right? To be able to record something yourself or to be able to pop something in and watch something on demand, wild, right? On demand movie, insane. And yet, everybody got really excited. They built, the whole company started to build cabinets, VCR organization cabinets of the cassettes, right? And I think, and then people started to look forward and say, well, okay, well, how do we optimize this? Well, instead of being a nice thick disc or a thick cassette, we can put it onto a disc, make a DVD. Look how much more you can get on it. Oh my gosh, we can make it even more data onto that and make Blu-ray. Right. And then you had Netflix come along and other, streamers that said, let's take a step back and actually think what we're trying to solve here. We're not doing this constant iterative optimization problem. We're actually trying to solve the problem of how do we watch entertainment on demand? How do we do that in the most efficient way possible? That's not just this iterative cycle, obviously streaming. Now, why that relates to AI and where we're at in the world today is that everybody is obsessed with LLMs. They're so exciting. It's so cool. You can ask it questions. It's like a human. It gives you really smart ideas. Feels like it's thinking, right? That is the VCR. It will be soon unbelievably outdated. Anybody who tries to tell you, and I'm calling out some certain CEOs out there, that tells you LLMs are going to be the basis of AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, meaning AI that's equivalent or greater than that of a human, is fooling you. I mean, think about how ridiculous that claim is. It's saying that when you think about how LLMs and based AIs work, right? It's humans. We have thoughts. We have language. Anybody who would tell you that the abstraction of thoughts to language actually is reasonable, that there's no loss of data in that, right? Obviously, right? It goes from thoughts to language, still in our brain, then to words. Then it's captured and put online or into a book. And then the LLM comes along, takes that, extracts that, combines all that it can of human knowledge that's been written, again, through all of these layers of abstraction from actual thinking. And then we're going to call that thinking and say that it actually has the ability? No, not at all, right? True thinking comes in a lot of different forms, and that's a longer discussion. But this is where, on the investment side, we invest heavily in non-LLM based AIs. That's number one. The number two thing is similar to the people who built the VCR cassette cabinets. All of the hype around data centers and how we need more power, we need more data centers. I think a lot of people are going to lose billions of dollars. Absolutely. This is the bubble that we're in because those data centers are being built with the current AI in mind, right? When you look at the new chipsets that are being built, like whether it's NVIDIA or a competitor. There's a lot of competitors rising up that hope that if NVIDIA, wants to keep an advantage, they're going to have to buy. That if we look at the data centers and what's actually required, you look at like photonics, for example, like the ability to be able to do it. It's when you look at the cost of building these data centers, it's actually going to be cheaper to build brand new data centers than to retrofit them for what the actual compute that's needed in the future. On top of that, you look at the level of optimization, right? Yes, the usage is going up, and AI companies want to tell you, oh, there's so much more people using it for more complex things, and so therefore we need more power, right? But we don't need more power. The efficiency levels are exponentially increasing on top of the fact the models are getting better, and the actual physical hardware is not just getting better, but is itself revolutionizing, not just these iterative cycles. It's a wild world we live in. Future generations are going to look back and just be like, what were you guys thinking? Just like we would think about, Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster was a great idea at the time, and we needed it for a little bit. But to think that we're going to invest billions of dollars into building out Blockbusters on every street corner, ridiculous.
Sounds like you're investing in things like neurosymbolic spiking networks, or maybe global foundation models. Excuse me, you mentioned photonic chips, maybe thermodynamic chips or something you're looking at as well. Anyways, we're going to have to close off this interview with one last question. We got a minute left. What final recommendations or questions you want to leave the audience?
My challenge to everybody is, my life motto, simply enjoy the ride. I really hope that everybody enjoys the ride, right? It's a wild world we live in. Every day is a ride. It's a journey of unexpected blessings, of surprises, of challenges that can enable us to grow and to be able to have a deeper connection to ourselves and to others. That is the joy of living. And so I hope just everybody who's out there, I hope you hear from me, enjoy the ride. And if there's anything I can do to help support you in your journey, please feel free to reach out. Instagram is a great way, obviously, and LinkedIn as well. But feel free to reach out, and I hope I see you all soon.
Well, thank you again, Fox. And you're definitely the sort of the global matrix example of combinatorial, computational, infinite thinking in a sense, right? So very novel. So thank you again, and blessings to you.
Blessings to you, brother. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.